wanted to ask you this, and we've talked about this before. What's the history of AIB? Like, when you started the whole thing, what's the story behind it? How did it come about?
So the inspiration behind AIB, we began as a podcast. There's a podcast called WTF with Mark.
By the way, for our American listeners, you should probably translate AIB, and we're going to keep this PG-13, and we're going to hope we don't get kicked out of Clubhouse.
Which means we can't translate, Sriram.
Okay, all right. Okay.
AIB stands for All India Bakchod. Bakchod is a word for someone who, who's like a trash talker, who's like, So it's like slang. So we deliberately kept that name because we knew that, we were a little profane, we were a little brash, we were really on the face. So if you weren't okay with the name, you wouldn't be okay with the content that we were doing. So we were very adamant about not making it PG-13. That's what AIB means. We began as a podcast. We really wanted to document what was happening in the Indian comedy scene. Mark Maron interviewed, Mark Maron has got Obama on his show. He's got, Seinfeld, you name it. So we said, hey, there's this massive transformation that's happening in India. Comedy is becoming more mainstream. We should probably document all the comedians. Eventually, it became a podcast about, we almost exclusively spoke about taboo subjects. And then eventually we pivoted to video. We weren't keen on video until YouTube literally forced us to start making videos, and then we blew up. That's how it began.
Wow. That's amazing. And at some point it got like really, really popular. Tell us, you talked about a couple of stories which we thought were like incredible, especially the one with police.
So at some point, for those of you listening, Tanmay and AIB are, have quite the interesting history. At one point in time, got into trouble with the authorities a few years ago. So you maybe tell us a story around that. And I think you evading the local law enforcement is an interesting.
Yeah, it's a couple of interesting stories. So we did the comedy roast of Ranveer Singh and Arjun Kapoor. We had Karan Johar on as roast master. They are three of the biggest stars in Bollywood. That happened because we did a sketch with Alia Bhatt, again, one of the most popular actresses in the country. So these guys all agreed, right? And nothing like this had been done before. So we did a massive show for about 5,000 people in like this stadium, and that show blew up. And then because there was a lot of profanity in the show, it's a comedy roast, right? If you compare what we did to what happens on Comedy Central, it seems pretty tame, right? So we were worried that we were pretty tame because our idols were all these guys who were doing stuff in America. But little did we know that we would get into trouble. So the first 3 days, the show, the videos, they clocked around close to 45 to 50 million views. On that day, we were number 2 YouTube channel in the world. We were right below Taylor Swift. God damn it. Anyway. And then we had 16 FIRs in the course of that week lodged against us. First information report, which is people went in and complained saying, obscenity was a word that was used. So we uploaded the video, I think, on a Thursday. And this was our first run-in with this sort of mainstream controversy. So someone called us and told us saying, listen, you guys got to be careful because what usually happens is the cops pick people up on a Friday and then they lock them in over the weekend because you can't get bail on the weekend because the courts don't operate then. So you guys got to not be at home because that'll be the address that the cops know. So I remember all of us woke up
just to be clear, the accusation was that you folks were using profane language in the roast.
Yeah, pretty much it. How could you use the F word? That was about it. It was really confusing time because even the cops who eventually met us, they were like, we don't quite know what to do here, but people seem to be really angry with you, so I guess we got to do something about it. So we left Friday morning. We all 4 of us sat in 2 different cars and we drove all around the city in case we
just to avoid the cops.
Just to avoid the cops coming to our houses, constantly talking to our parents saying, hey, have any cops come home? Then we drove all around the city. We alternated cars in the middle. We changed cars. We really thought that they're going to go through this much effort.
So this sounds really badass and really sad at the same time.
It was. Shri, I want to tell you a story, right? So, a couple of years from the roast, right, I made a Snapchat video which made fun of, there were some jokes about Sachin Tendulkar, right? Like that became a huge thing.
Yep, I was at Snapchat at the time, Tanmay. I remember this very well.
Yeah. For all the downloads that I got you're welcome. So I remember this couple of political parties were really angry at me, right? They said, "How could you make fun of Sachin Tendulkar?" And they went out on TV, and one of them said, "Hey, we're gonna, if I see this boy, if I see Tanmay Bhatt in the city, we're gonna break his legs, right?" So I was like, okay, I was incredibly scared. The next morning, I wake up and I open Twitter and I saw some of the news channels saying, "If I see Tanmay Bhatt in the city, we're gonna kill him," right? Like their death threat against Tanmay Bhatt was the headline that was being carried. So I was like, hey, hang on. They just spoke about breaking my legs. Like, why are we bringing death into this? Doesn't this seem aggressive? So I spoke to my manager. I said, can we get in touch with these guys who are really angry at us? So then I called them and I said, hey, what am I seeing on the news? You said you're threatening to kill me. And at the other end are these, almost semi-goonish type people who were like, death threat? Hang on. We just spoke about breaking your legs. Hang on.
Wait, hold on a second. Wait. I'm curious. You reached out to talk to the people who were threatening you.
Because the whole thing is a facade, right? Look, politicians and folks who get offended, they do it so they get their 30 minutes of fame on the media. They get to be on these news channels, and it's like for their audience base who are more conservative, it's a show of power. So for me, it was like, okay, I get what you're doing, and I know we're all playing this game, but I think death threat is taking it too far. And when I said that, they said, okay, let us call you back. We're going to discuss with our internal comms and policy team and see what happened here. And then he calls you back and he said, listen, we didn't say death, man. We just said breaking your legs. And then the next 10 minutes, both of us were bitching about the media, saying, the media really exaggerates these things. And today we're good friends because that time is over. And now we're in touch. God. Every Diwali, he sends me an invite to his party, and we're friends now. So it's really interesting being in the middle of a controversy, because you really then, to really understand how the media functions, I would highly suggest everybody to be a part of like a mainstream controversy.
By the way, that's a hilarious story. Like that's like out of a comedy sketch somewhere. Like oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. Right. We were actually bonding over how the media is crazy. So anyway, so we met once the roast thing was happening. Our first time going to a cop station was interesting because we were so worried there'd be media outside, and which there were. But when we went inside for the first time, it's so cliche, right? Like we were all very scared. So there was literally a good cop, bad cop situation. We had a first inspector who was there, who was
right. So by the way, just folks here who may be here from the US, like dealing with the cops in India is a very different proposition, and often just really, I mean, it was just something when you're growing up, you were always like really intimidated and scared by.
Oh yeah, in India you don't want to, like, I don't know what happens now. Even if I'm driving on the road and there's a weak cop car next to me, I just double check if my seatbelt's on, because for some reason in my head they're just going to catch me for something. Right? There's very little trust in state infrastructure and whatnot. So we went there, and the first time we met our inspector who was in charge of our case. He was incredibly nice man, by the way. But the first time he was meeting us, he just casually took out a gun and kept it on the table. And like the Indian middle class boy in me was both petrified but also fascinated. I'd never seen a gun. And I know I was there to report for something that people complain against me, but I really wanted to touch the gun as well. So it was this really interesting. And then there was a first meeting, and then eventually the gun stopped coming out. Multiple meetings, we had to go give statements. Eventually, it was pretty funny because, at some point, they finally wrote down the FIRs, and at some point, the cops were like, hey, what are these jokes and where were you guys telling them? So then I took out my phone and I gave it to him, and then they started watching the roast in the police station. And then 10 minutes into it, there were 10 cops around the table all cracking up, right? And they all think the roast is hilarious. And this guy started high-fiving me saying, dude, this is so funny. I can't believe you said this to Karan Johar, that's crazy. And eventually it was a very sweet bonding experience.
By the way, I love that the outcome of these stories is you made friends with the guy who was threatening to break your legs, and then you made friends with the cops.
I made friends with the cops.
That arrest you. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think I think people are, there's just a front of a lot of this anger, but really, if you really sit down and talk and communicate, a lot of the issues are solved, right? Like I have no qualms when it comes to apologizing and really shaking hands and being like, let's just sit and talk. It's not a big deal. But what a lot of people don't understand about comedy is, like, a lot of times, just flirting with that line is usually what, especially early on in your career, right? That's usually what excites you. And in India, where there are so many holy cows, there's a certain level of thrill early on in your career, saying stuff that you are traditionally told to never say. I'm sure this happens this is not just an India phenomenon. I'm sure it happens in conservative countries across the world. Comedians are inherently rebellious, right? So it sort of came naturally to us.
It also seems to be like you folks also